Hello, my name is Elizabeth, and I am 42 years old. I don't often talk about myself, but if I were to start from the very beginning, it would probably be from the day I had to become an adult, not by age, but by circumstance. I have a younger brother, Patrick. He is 32 now, and from the outside, we are just ordinary relatives, different but close. However, a whole lifetime lies between us, a life in which I was, for a long time, both a sister and a mother and a father and a support system when the rest of the world turned away. When I was 25 and Patrick was 15, our parents died in a car accident. It happened on one of those deceptively sunny days when everything seems safe. One phone call and everything falls apart. One day they were here and the next they were gone. I remember that evening. The phone call, the doctor's voices, crumpled documents, the smell of the hospital, and a silence that made my ears ring. Death is not a scream, but precisely that silence, an emptiness that fills a house where laughter had echoed just the day before. After the funeral, it became clear. Someone had to take care of Patrick. He was just a child, skinny, his features sharpened, hiding tears behind a facade of stubbornness. Our aunts and uncles averted their eyes. Everyone had their own families, their own children, their own problems. No one wanted to take responsibility for a teenager with an inner storm and not a single island of stability. So I took him in, without hesitation, without illusions, but with a sense of duty that was stronger than anything else. I became his legal guardian. At that time, I worked in a small office, routine paperwork, a decent salary, but nothing special. And suddenly, I had to support two people, not one. I restructured my life. I learned to count every penny, wake up 2 hours earlier, stay at work longer than anyone else. I took on extra work on weekends, accepted small freelance jobs from home. I did everything so that Patrick could have a normal life, so that he wouldn't feel the loss that I felt with every fiber of my being. I bought him fashionable clothes so he wouldn't stand out among his friends. I made sure he had the latest models of phones and computers. Teenage pride demanded it. I turned every one of his birthdays into a celebration, with balloons, music, cake, guests. I wanted him to laugh. I wanted our parents' death to not rob him of his right to be a child. I saved money for his future, for college, for housing, for everything that could provide confidence in tomorrow. When the time came, I paid for everything. Tuition, books, the dormitory. I even bought him a car so the commute to campus wouldn't be a torment. And I, myself, I wore old clothes, repaired my shoes, ate cheap food, and didn't go on vacation. It seemed normal to me. The main thing was that he could soar. After graduating from college, Patrick got a job. He rented an apartment, but money was tight, and I continued to help. I paid the rent, transferred money every month. He always thanked me, called, said I was the best sister in the world. And I believed him. I believed that all those years of sacrifice were not in vain. Then Gabrielle appeared in his life. Beautiful, confident, with a soft smile and attentive eyes. They dated for 5 years, and when he said he wanted to marry her, I didn't hesitate for a second. I paid for their wedding, $20,000, but it seemed like a trifle compared to what I saw in his eyes. Happiness. Right after the wedding, I gave Patrick another $30,000 for a down payment on a house. A good house, in a good neighborhood. A house I would have chosen for myself if I could. I thought that now everything had finally fallen into place, that our life, wounded and skewed, had found balance. That Patrick, my little brother, almost my child, was finally happy. But after the wedding, everything changed. Gabrielle started coming to my house often. At first, I was happy. I thought she just wanted to get closer, to become part of the family. We drank tea, chatted about trivial things, laughed. But over time, I began to notice oddities. Every time she would ask to borrow something, a sweater, a pair of shoes, a purse. We wore the same size, and it was convenient for her. "Can I borrow this for a couple of days? I have an event coming up," she would say. Of course, I never refused, but the things never came back. Weeks passed and my closet was emptying. I would text her, "Gabrielle, don't forget to return that blouse." She would answer in a light tone. "Oh, I left it at my mom's. I'll get it next time." But there was no next time. No blouse, no purse, no former feeling that I was needed by someone. And then, for the first time, I felt something heavy, as if someone I loved more than life itself had begun quietly erasing me from my own. A few months after that conversation, I suddenly caught myself thinking that my house had become suspiciously empty. Not all at once, but little by little, as if someone were pulling out the coziness thread by thread, the trust drop by drop. Over the past few months, I had lost at least 10 items, all because of Gabrielle. Not trifles. Good things I had saved up for, set money aside for, chosen carefully, as if every purchase was a promise to myself that life could still be beautiful. I hesitated to confront her directly for a long time, but one day I finally gathered my courage. She was at my house again, standing in front of the mirror examining a new jacket I had just brought from the store yesterday. Her fingers, thin and confident, slid over the fabric as if the item already belonged to her. "Gabrielle, you still have my blue blouse," I said, trying to keep my voice even, "and the black trousers and that sweater I lent you in March." She turned around, raised an eyebrow as if surprised by the very fact of my reminder. "I just want you to return what you already have," I added. "I won't lend you anything else until you return the rest." A flush spread across her face, not of shame but of irritation. "Are you serious?" she said. "You're so greedy, Elizabeth." "I'm not greedy," I replied calmly. "I just want my things back." At that moment, Patrick walked into the room. I felt his gaze, tired, irritated, as if I had disturbed some invisible peace. "What's going on?" he asked. Gabrielle didn't even let me answer. "Your sister is making a mountain out of a molehill," she said, lowering her eyes. "I just borrowed a couple of things, and she's acting like I stole them." "Elizabeth, come on," Patrick sighed. "Don't make a scene, just give her the things. You have plenty of clothes." I stared at him, not believing my ears. "She never returns anything," I said quietly. He shrugged. "So what? You can afford to buy more." I wanted to answer, to tell him how I had lived all these years, how I had denied myself everything for his sake, but the words stuck in my throat. I didn't want to fight with my brother, so I remained silent. After that incident, I stopped lending anything to Gabrielle. When she asked, I made excuses, said the item was in the laundry, that I needed it myself. And soon, she stopped coming over. The house became quieter, but this silence brought no joy. It felt like a separation. Time passed. Recently, I finally had money for renovations, the very money I had saved for years, bit by bit, as if piecing myself back together. I bought new furniture, modern appliances, updated the kitchen, the walls, the floors. I even changed the locks on the door, put in good, reliable ones. The house shone with cleanliness and newness, and for the first time in a long while, I felt proud. My old furniture and appliances were in perfect condition. I had always treated my things carefully, almost with respect. And then I thought that Patrick and Gabrielle might want them. They had recently moved, their new house was still empty, and I wanted to help. I called Patrick. "Hi," I said. "I just bought new furniture and appliances. Maybe you could use my old things. The sofa, the kitchen table, the refrigerator. Everything's in perfect condition. I just decided to upgrade." There was a pause. Then, somewhere in the background, I heard Gabrielle's voice. Cold, clear. "Tell her we don't need her junk." Patrick spoke again, but not in his own voice, but in a strange, dull tone. "Sorry, Elizabeth. We're not interested. We have different plans for our house." "Okay," I said quietly. "No problem." I was a little hurt, but I didn't show it. After all, they were just things. I put the furniture up for sale and sold it cheap, just to get rid of it. A week passed. I came home from work late, tired but content. Life seemed to have finally settled down. But as I approached the house, I noticed something was wrong. The lock on the door was broken. The door was slightly ajar. My heart hammered in my chest. I pushed the door open. Inside, silence. But not the usual evening silence, but a foreign, cold one. I stepped inside and froze. The house was empty. Not just tidied, cleaned out completely. My new furniture was gone. The appliances were gone. The TV, the dishes, not a single item I had paid for with years of sweat and labor remained. I stood in the emptiness, feeling everything inside me break. I had been robbed. Everything I had just built had disappeared. Everything I had saved for and that symbolized a new life had been ripped out from under me. And then I noticed a piece of paper taped to the wall. The handwriting was familiar, painfully so. Patrick's handwriting. "Elizabeth," it read, "we moved your furniture and appliances to our house. We need them more than you do. You can buy something else later. Thank you." The world around me seemed to vanish. The words blurred, the air became thick and bitter. Everything I had ever given for his sake came back to me in a single phrase. We need them more. I was still standing in the middle of the ransacked house, with Patrick's crumpled note in my hand, when there was a quiet, almost polite knock at the door. That sound, so mundane, suddenly felt alien, a reminder that the world outside still existed, even when your own was crumbling. Mrs. Henderson, my neighbor from across the street, stood on the doorstep, an elderly woman with a soft face and a surprisingly straight posture despite her years. She must have been close to 70. There was concern in her eyes. "Elizabeth, are you all right?" she asked, peering over my shoulder. "I saw your door was open." I just nodded, unable to explain what had happened. She stepped inside and froze, looking around. "My God," she exhaled, "everything is gone." "It was Patrick," I said finally, "my brother." I handed her the note. She put on her glasses, scanned the lines, and her face, always calm, suddenly changed. It became hard, tight. Anger flared in her, unexpected and bright. "I saw him here today," she said. "He had a moving truck. He was unloading things from your house." My heart clenched. "What did he say?" I asked. "I approached him and asked what he was doing. He said you had told him he could take whatever he needed, so I didn't think anything of it. I'm sorry, Elizabeth." "It's not your fault," I said quietly. "He lied to you." Mrs. Henderson looked genuinely upset. "I have a security camera at my house," she added. "It recorded everything. If you want, I can give you the video." "Yes," I replied, feeling a cold resolve waking inside me. "Please, I need that video." She nodded and, limping slightly, went home. 10 minutes later, she returned with a flash drive, neatly labeled in her handwriting. I thanked her, and for the first time that evening, felt a tiny prick of relief. Not even hope, but a sort of quiet confidence. The truth was now in my possession. But along with it, anger at myself was growing. I knew the neighborhood wasn't the safest. I'd heard about break-ins, I'd planned to install cameras, an alarm system, and I kept putting it off because I thought, who would want anything from me? Turns out, someone did. But now I had proof. All the receipts for the furniture and appliances, photos from the delivery, bank statements with the payments, every item had been specifically ordered for my house, for my dimensions, for my life. I dialed Patrick's number. He answered on the second ring, his voice cheerful as if nothing had happened. "Hi, Elizabeth." "Bring everything back," I said. My voice trembled, but I tried to speak clearly. "You stole my furniture and appliances. Return everything immediately." He chuckled. "I didn't steal anything. I just took what you didn't need. You can buy new stuff for yourself." "You broke my lock, Patrick. You took them without asking. That's theft." "Oh, come on, Elizabeth," he said lazily. "Don't be so dramatic." And suddenly I heard another voice near him, high-pitched, sharp, imperious. "Gabrielle." "Give me the phone," she said, and there was a rustle as if someone had snatched the receiver from his hand. "You should be ashamed of yourself," she shouted. "You have money and we don't. We can barely make the mortgage payments, and you live alone in a big house hoarding junk. This was our chance to make our home cozy. You robbed me," I said quietly. "We didn't rob you," she snapped. "We borrowed it." "Borrowed," I repeated. "You call this borrowing?" "And you know what?" Gabrielle continued, not listening. "We've already had craftsmen over to refit the kitchen cabinets for our space, so we can't return anything anyway. You have 3 days." "Return everything or I will call the police," I said. Laughter echoed from the other end. "You won't call," she said. "You can't. He's your brother." And she hung up. I sat in silence, trembling, clutching the phone as if it could explain to me how any of this was possible. 17 years. I had raised Patrick for 17 years. I had given him everything I had. And this is how he repaid me. I opened my banking app. My hands were still shaking. Among the familiar numbers, I saw an automatic payment, $1,000 monthly, my transfer for Patrick's mortgage, the one I had set up over a year ago to help them get on their feet, without any discussion, without gratitude, just because it was necessary. I pressed cancel. A confirmation flashed on the screen, and it suddenly felt easier to breathe. The next morning, I went to see a lawyer. His name was David Chen. We had worked together before on business matters, and I knew he was a straightforward man, not given to sentimentality. He met me in his office, politely but warily. My face probably showed that this was serious. I told him everything, holding nothing back, step by step. I showed him the note, the video, the photos, the receipts, the bank statements, everything that proved this wasn't a family quarrel, but an actual crime. David listened silently without interrupting, but his gaze was attentive and focused. When I finished, he took off his glasses, wiped them with a cloth, and said evenly, calmly, like a doctor delivering a diagnosis, "This is clear theft, Elizabeth, but let's do this properly." He spoke clearly, point by point without unnecessary words, and it gave me back a sense of control I had almost lost. "First, document everything," he continued. "Photograph the broken lock, describe every missing item. Make a list, in detail, with brands, serial numbers, cost. Then we wait 3 days, as you told them. If he doesn't return anything in that time, we file a police report." I nodded, and David immediately got to work. He typed up an official letter on his computer, making notes in a neat, confident hand. The letter stated that Patrick had exactly 3 days to return all the stolen property. Otherwise, both civil and criminal charges would be filed against him. He printed the document, signed it, and called a courier. I watched as the man in uniform took the envelope, and something akin to bitterness and relief simultaneously tightened in my chest. At home, I marked 3 days on the calendar. Every evening I returned from work and looked at my phone. No calls, no messages, not a single attempt to explain. Only emptiness, which felt like an admission. On the 4th day, I went to the police station and filed a theft report. I explained everything in detail, handed over the receipts, photos, the flash drive with the recording, a copy of the letter. The young officer taking the report was polite and attentive. He said, "We'll start the investigation today." When I left the station, the sky was darkening and the wind was driving fallen leaves down the street. I suddenly felt that I had finally crossed a line, from family to the law, from love to justice. A few hours later, the phone rang. I flinched. Patrick. I didn't have time to say a word. His voice slammed into my ear, a shout, almost a screech. "What have you done? The police just came. They detained us. They're going to question us. Are you insane?" In the background, Gabrielle was screaming, piercingly, hysterically. "You've ruined our lives." I answered calmly, almost quietly. "You had 3 days, Patrick. You chose not to use them." He suddenly faltered, his voice becoming pleading. "Elizabeth, please, we'll return everything. Just drop the charges." "No," I said. "Things have to take their course now." And I hung up. An hour later, David called. "The police want you to come in," he said. "Patrick and Gabrielle are at the station. They're asking for a meeting." We went together. The precinct smelled of coffee and paper. We were led to a small room with a metal table. They were sitting behind it, my brother and his wife. Patrick looked exhausted, his eyes red, his shoulders slumped. Gabrielle was crying, smearing her mascara. "Elizabeth," he began, his voice hollow, "please drop the charges. We'll return everything today." "You were supposed to return it 4 days ago," I said. "We made a mistake," Gabrielle chimed in, sobbing. "We're so sorry. We didn't think it would go this far. Please don't do this to us." I looked at them. Sitting before me was the person whose hand I had held when he was afraid of the dark, the one I bought his first suit for prom for, whose tears I wiped away. And next to him, the woman who had become his mirror, and it seemed My opposite. I am not dropping the charges, I said finally. You will return my property because the law demands it. But I am done with you, Patrick. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but I was already standing up. David rose after me. I didn't look back. 2 days later, David called again. They were released on bail, he informed me. They confessed and made a deal with the prosecutor. The court date is set for next month. The month dragged on slowly, like thick syrup. I lived mechanically. Work, home, rare conversations with David. Everything else seemed to have faded. When the court day arrived, I sat in the hall, watching as the evidence folder was brought in. The video, receipts, photos, copies of messages. The judge was stern but fair. Patrick and Gabrielle sat opposite, side by side, heads bowed. Their faces showed fatigue, fear, shame. After a long hearing, the judge pronounced the sentence: probation for each, a fine of $1,500 each, and the obligation to immediately return all my property. Furthermore, they were to reimburse the damage to the house, the lock, the floor, the porch railing. The decision was just, but it brought no relief. I just sat and listened as the names, sums, and legal terms were read out, as if they were talking about strangers. After the court session, I went into David's office. He silently poured me a glass of water, set it in front of me, and only then asked, "What next, Elizabeth?" "I need to change my will," I said. He looked up. "Everything remains in effect except for Patrick. I want to completely remove him from the inheritance." "I understand," David replied quietly. "Instead, I want to create a trust fund. After my death, everything will go to charity." He nodded. "I'll prepare the documents and the notification." I looked at him and added, "I want him to know. I want Patrick to understand. He is no longer my heir." 2 days after I changed the will, David, as promised, sent Patrick an official notification. It was dry, emotionless, with the business-like precision characteristic of his letters. "You have been excluded from the inheritance. Upon the death of Elizabeth Warren, all assets will transfer to a charitable trust fund." No extra words, just facts, and a notary's signature. That evening, I was sitting in the living room with a cup of cooled tea when I heard a dull, angry knock at the door. Not the kind made by someone coming with a request, but one backed by irritation, almost rage. My heart sank. I went to the door, looked through the peephole. Patrick and Gabrielle. I opened the door but left the chain on. Their faces were twisted with tension. "You changed the will?" Patrick shouted before he even crossed the threshold. His cheeks were flushed, his eyes sparking. "Are you serious? I'm your family. Everything should go to me." I looked at him calmly. "You broke into my house, Patrick. You stole my things. Why would I leave you anything?" "It was a mistake." He stepped closer, but the chain stopped him. "We already apologized." "No," I said quietly. "You didn't apologize. You just returned what you were obligated to return by court order. That's not an apology." Gabrielle stood behind him, her eyes red, tears streaming down her cheeks. Suddenly, she stepped forward, clasping her hands over her stomach. "I'm pregnant," she said, her voice trembling. "We're having a baby. You're going to be an aunt. Don't you care?" I looked at her, young, confused, the one who had once called me sister. "Congratulations," I replied, "but that doesn't change what you did. You're cruel," she cried out. "You called the police. You made us look like criminals in front of everyone, and now you're disinheriting us." I shook my head wearily. "It was never your inheritance. It's my property. I decide what happens to it." "We need that money," Gabrielle started again. "We can barely pay the bills, the mortgage." "That's not my problem," I said, feeling a coldness settling inside. Patrick grabbed the door, his fingers white with tension. "Change the will back. You owe me." "I owe you?" The words escaped before I could stop myself. "I raised you, Patrick. I paid for everything. For clothes, for food, for college. I bought you a car, helped with your apartment, paid for your wedding, made the down payment on your house. For 17 years, I was your support. And after all that, you stand here and tell me I owe you? You were supposed to take care of me," he yelled. "That was your job." I froze. Those words hit harder than any shout. "My job," I repeated. Yes, I raised you until you were 18, but I kept doing it for another 14 years. Not because I had to, but because I loved you. And you repaid me with theft." "We made one mistake," he muttered. "No," I said. "It wasn't a mistake, it was a decision, a conscious and vile one." Gabrielle flared up. "You're not sinless either. You humiliated us. We asked for forgiveness, and you still punished us." I looked at her, and a wave of bitterness rose in my chest. "Gabrielle, you never once apologized sincerely. You and Patrick refused the old furniture and then stole the new one. You broke into my house, damaged the lock, the floor, the railing. You didn't just break walls, you destroyed trust." There was a pause. Then Patrick said, his voice hollow, "Fine, I'm sorry. Is that what you want to hear?" "Too late," I replied. "I don't believe a word you say anymore." I took a step back and closed the door, leaving the chain in place. "Don't call me," I added. "If you harass me, I'll get a restraining order." I slammed the door shut and the metal clanged in the silence. Outside, they were still knocking, shouting something, but I didn't respond. After a few minutes, their footsteps receded. I stood there, my forehead pressed against the door, until my heart stopped pounding. The house was quiet again, but the silence was heavy, like lead. The following week, I called in security specialists. They installed cameras around the house, motion sensors, and an alarm system. Now every corner was under surveillance. I should have done this long ago. Maybe then I would have avoided all of this. When all the equipment was installed, the technician handed me the remote and said, "You're under reliable protection now." I thanked him and was left alone. The furniture and appliances, as ordered by the court, were returned. Workers delivered everything carefully, according to the inventory. Every item was in its place. The armchair by the window, the table in the living room, the dresser in the bedroom. Everything looked as if nothing had happened. But I knew it had. My house was full of things again, but empty of warmth. I passed by a mirror and suddenly saw my reflection. The tired, drawn face of a woman whose eyes no longer held any expectation. I had lost my brother. I had lost that part of myself that believed it was possible to get the past back. The only family I had left. Sometimes I caught myself wondering, had I been too harsh? In the evening, sitting in the kitchen with a cup of tea, I would stare out the window for a long time at the reflection of the streetlights and my own face, trying to understand if I had gone too far. But every time, as soon as the memory of that day surfaced, the empty house, the broken lock, the note with its uneven letters, "We need them more," the doubts vanished. I remembered standing in the ravaged space where my new furniture had recently stood, feeling as if a part of my life had been torn out of me. I remembered Gabrielle's words, her cold, almost mocking, "You should be ashamed for wanting your things back." No, I wasn't harsh. I had been foolishly lenient. I had allowed myself to be used for far too long. A few weeks passed. The phone rarely rang, mostly for work, but one evening a name appeared on the screen. Aunt Evelyn. My mother's older sister, a soft-spoken, reserved woman, one of those who believes any crack can be mended with patience and lemon tea. "Elizabeth, I need to talk to you," she said, "about Patrick." I felt everything inside me clench. "What about him?" "He and Gabrielle came to see me," Aunt Evelyn sighed. "They are very upset about what happened between you." "I'm sure," I replied. "It's probably hard for them when consequences catch up with actions." "He asked me to help him reconcile with you," she continued. "He says he wants to apologize properly." I chuckled. "He's had more than enough time, and chances. He simply chose not to apologize." "Elizabeth, he's your brother," she reminded me softly. "Family is important." "Family," I repeated. "He didn't think it was important when he broke into my house, when he was hauling away my things while I was at work, when he lied, looking me in the eye." Aunt Evelyn sighed wearily, as if we were repeating an old argument whose outcome was already known to her. "People make mistakes." "This wasn't a mistake," I said quietly but firmly. "It was a choice. He chose to rob me. He chose to lie. He chose to put his needs above our bond. It wasn't a breakdown. It was his will." The silence stretched. I could hear her breathing on the other end. "What do you want me to tell him?" "Tell him I don't want to reconcile," I replied. "Tell him I've had enough." I said it calmly, without anger, but with a certainty that felt like sealing an envelope no one would ever open. "All right," Aunt Evelyn said after a pause. "I'll tell him." When I hung up, silence filled the room. I sat at the table and looked at my hands for a long time. Thin, veined, slightly trembling from fatigue. I was 42. A full 17 of those 42 years I had lived not my own life. I remembered all those evenings I worked late to pay for Patrick's college, his car, his wedding, his renovations. I denied myself trips, rest, dreams. I always thought, I'll have time later. But later stretched into years. Now that later had finally arrived. I opened my laptop. The white light of the screen reflected on my face, and I started searching. Just like that, without a specific goal. Travel sites, bright photos of the ocean, mountains, sun-drenched streets, beach resorts, European tours, Caribbean cruises. All the places I had never been because I was working, saving, caring. All for others. I settled on Hawaii. Sandy beaches, green hills, houses with thatched roofs. 2 weeks, all inclusive. I didn't think, I just booked it. When I got the confirmation, I smiled for the first time in a long while. The next day, I told Jessica, my colleague and perhaps the only person with whom I had a real relationship left. "Finally," she said, clapping her hands. "You deserve a vacation, Liz. How long can you work nonstop?" "I know," I said. "I think it's time to start living for myself." "And Patrick?" she asked cautiously. "Have you heard anything from him?" "No," I replied, "and I don't want to. That chapter is closed." Jessica nodded. "Good. He took advantage of you for far too long." I felt those words, simple but accurate, settle within me. Yes, he took advantage, and I allowed it because I loved him, because I thought that's what family does. Helps, forgives, waits. But real family doesn't betray you. Real family doesn't take away what you've built for years and justify it by need. Real family is those who value your kindness, not demand it as their due. Patrick ceased to be my family the day he left that note on the wall. I ceased to be his support the day I signed the papers at David's office and crossed him out of the will. Now it was time to be my own support. Weeks passed. Work continued as usual, but the days felt lighter. The air in the house seemed to have cleared. I stopped waking up with anxiety and checking my phone for messages from Patrick. There were none. No calls, no letters, no random visits. Gabrielle had disappeared too, as if dissolved. The restraining order was working, and for the first time in a long time, the silence was not agonizing, but liberating. I felt myself gradually returning to the person I had once been before all those years of care, duty, and fear. My breathing became more even, my step more confident. I started buying books I wanted to read again, and flowers, not for decoration, but simply because they pleased the eye. My life had finally stopped being an extension of someone else's. It was mine again. My security system was now fully installed. The sleek black eyes of the cameras watched every corner of my house. Like invisible guardians I could finally trust. I checked the recording on the monitor. The yard, the porch, the hallway, everything was under control. The alarm emitted a short sound if I accidentally triggered a sensor, and I felt a strange satisfaction from that chime. It was a reminder that no one could enter here without my knowledge now. For the first time in many years, I truly felt safe in my own home. All the furniture, every little thing, every towel and cup was back in its place, as if nothing had happened. The court had ordered them to return everything, and I had carefully checked each item, as if reaffirming my ownership of this space. Everything looked the same as before, but it felt different. This place was now mine, not a temporary refuge, not an arena for endless struggle, not a storage room for someone else's debts, but a quiet fortress where no one would dare touch me. I returned to my usual routine, waking at 7, brewing coffee, driving to work. But the work itself had a different flavor. I no longer stayed at the office until night, didn't grab extra projects, didn't try to prove to everyone and myself that I had to be indispensable. Now I chose when to leave, and I left on time. Colleagues noticed the change. "You seem different." John, our financial analyst, a man who was hard to surprise, said one day. "Happier." "I really am happy," I replied. And it was the pure truth without the usual weary irony. I started doing things I had never allowed myself. I joined a book club. Every Saturday we met in a small cafe that smelled of cinnamon and the dust of old pages, argued about characters, and shared stories that had no place for Patrick. I signed up for a painting class. My hands trembled when I first held a brush, but shapes, lines, colors suddenly appeared on the paper, reminding me that I could still create. I started having dinner with friends, laughing over trivialities, choosing a restaurant not by the prices on the menu, but by the smell and the light in the windows. I bought myself beautiful clothes, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to. Not gray office suits, but soft fabrics, silk, linen, colors that reflected the sun. For the first time in many years, I looked at myself in the mirror and didn't see a tired woman, but a vibrant, well-groomed, beautiful one. The salon, the spa, the new haircut, all these little things suddenly came together into a feeling. I exist again. In a few weeks, my trip to Hawaii was coming up. I counted the days like a child before Christmas. In the evenings, I laid out new swimsuits, sundresses, sandals on the bed, tried them on, laughed at myself. I even ordered a suitcase the color of sea foam. For the first time in a long time, I bought something simply because it brought me joy. But one evening, the phone rang. On the screen was a name I hadn't seen in a long time. Uncle Arthur, my father's older brother. We didn't talk often. "Elizabeth," he said after brief greetings, "I heard what happened with Patrick. He asked me to talk to you." I gripped the phone tighter. "I'm not interested," I said calmly. "Just listen," he pleaded. "He's your brother. Yes, he's made mistakes, but he's part of the family." "He didn't just make a mistake," I replied. "He broke into my house, stole everything I had." "I know," Uncle Arthur said. "It was wrong. No one's arguing. But maybe you could give him another chance." "Why? So he can steal again? Or so Gabrielle can come and take my furniture again, like last time?" "No, thank you. He's going to have a child soon," Uncle Arthur said. "Don't you want to be part of that child's life?" I fell silent. I mentally pictured a baby. Not Patrick's, not Gabrielle's, just a child. A tiny being who didn't know anything about betrayal yet. And still, "No," I said finally, "I don't. That child has parents. Let them take care of it. I took care of Patrick for 17 years. That's enough." "You're very cold," Uncle Arthur said quietly. "I'm not cold, Arthur. I'm just a realist. Patrick never valued anything I did for him. He only took. Always took. I'm tired of being used." "He's having a hard time now," Uncle Arthur persisted. "It's difficult for them without your support." "Good," I replied. "Maybe they'll finally learn to live within their means. I had to learn that when I was supporting both of us. They'll manage." After the conversation, I hung up and sat in the armchair for a long time, staring into the darkness. There was no anger inside, only a weary calm. Everyone around me wanted one thing, for me to forgive. Aunt Evelyn, Uncle Arthur, probably other relatives who would soon remember I existed. But none of them had lived my life. None of them had seen me come home to an empty house where every item had vanished, as if erased. None of them had heard that sound in their chest, fragile, like glass, when you realize the person you love has shattered your trust. They didn't raise Patrick. They didn't pay for his education, didn't wipe his tears after another failure, didn't bring home cheap food so there would be enough to pay his debts. They didn't give up their lives for him. I stood up, walked around the room, ran my palm over the smooth surface of the table, the soft back of the sofa. My home, my labor, my peace. All of it had been hard-won. Every item in it reminded me, this truly belongs to me now. I won't let anyone take it from me again, not literally, nor in any other sense. Patrick would never cross the threshold of my house again. That thought lived in me calmly, without pain, without remorse, like a fact one doesn't need to argue with. Gabrielle would never touch a single one of my things again, never walk through my rooms, never leave a trace behind, neither the scent of foreign perfume nor the echo of a voice. They had vanished from my life, as if washed away by the tide, and I was fine with it, more than fine. It was like an exhale after a long-held breath, like returning to my own body after years of living in a shadow. I felt relief, not sharp or bright, but quiet, deep, as if there was suddenly room in my chest for air that had been lacking before. A few days before the trip to Hawaii, Jessica dropped by. We had known each other for many years, but in all that time, we had rarely been at my house. Now I had invited her for dinner myself. I wanted someone to see my new order, my new life. I made pasta with sun-dried tomato and basil sauce, set the table, lit candles, simply because I wanted it to be beautiful. We sat in my dining room, eating and talking, and Jessica, leaning back in her chair, asked between sips of wine, "Have you heard anything from Patrick?" "No," I replied without hesitation, "and I hope I never do." She shook her head. "Do you think he learned his lesson?" "I don't know," I said, and smiling added, "To be honest, I don't care. He's no longer my problem." Jessica looked at me with a long, attentive gaze, not of curiosity, but rather of approval, and said, "You seem at peace, as if everything has finally fallen into place." "Yes," I replied. "For the first time in 17 years, I am free. I can do whatever I want, spend money on myself, make decisions without thinking about how it will affect Patrick." "And what are you going to do with all this freedom?" she asked, smiling, but her eyes were serious. "Everything," I said, feeling the word open up something spacious and bright inside me. "I will travel. I will meet people. I'm going to find out who I am, aside from being Patrick's sister." After Jessica left, the house sank into a soft silence. I sat on the sofa, a cooling cup of tea in my hands, and thought about the past, about the endless years dissolved in caring for my brother. All those nights of overtime work when I could barely stand, but knew I had to pay for his education, his housing, his dreams. All the times I said no to friends because I was saving money for him. All the vacations I never took to help him pay off his loans. I gave him everything I could, loved him with all I had, and he, without a second thought, swallowed it all, as if it were his due portion. But now there was no anger in me, not even resentment, only understanding. The understanding that everything that happened was meant to happen, that my leniency was my mistake and his betrayal was his choice. And perhaps there was a certain justice in that. Each of us did what we knew how to do. I was no longer angry, I just knew. Enough. Enough of being used, enough of putting others first, enough of living for someone who couldn't see my sacrifice. Patrick made his choice when he broke into my house. He chose money over trust, lies over love, his own needs over family, and now I was making mine. I was choosing myself. My trip to Hawaii became a kind of rebirth. I spent 2 weeks surrounded by endless ocean and sun, where every day began with the rustle of the surf and ended with the soft light of the moon falling on the balcony of my room. I read books on the beach, drank cocktails, listened to the wind playing in the palm trees, and for the first time in many years, felt a lightness that needed no explanation. I went snorkeling, saw colorful fish so bright it was like looking at a living mosaic. I took a helicopter ride over the island, and when green valleys, waterfalls, and turquoise coves flashed below, it suddenly seemed I was seeing my whole life from above, from that height where fears lose their shape. I ate food I had only read about in magazines, fresh seafood, mango, juices from fruits whose names I couldn't even pronounce. I talked to strangers, and it was easy because no one knew who I was or where I came from. I was just Elizabeth, not Patrick's sister, not his guardian, not the person who always had to, just a woman with her own life. When I returned home, my skin still held the scent of sun and salt, and my heart, a rare feeling of peace. I felt renewed, ready for what came next. Maybe I would start dating. Maybe I'd change jobs or travel somewhere again, to Italy, for example, or Scotland. Maybe I'd just buy a new sofa because I felt like a change. Whatever I did, it would be for me. Not for Patrick, not for anyone else. Only for myself. And it was wonderful. I never spoke to Patrick again. Occasionally, news reached me through relatives. He and Gabrielle had a daughter, a little girl. They said they were struggling, that money was slipping through their fingers. But they were managing somehow. And I felt no pity, no guilt, no desire to help. Just nothing. An empty space where there had once been too many feelings. They made their choice. I made mine. And for the first time in many years, I could say, without pretending, without convincing myself, but truly, I am happy.